Hi everybody, my name's Heather, and in this presentation we're going to be looking at a possible Jane response to the issue of self-defense. My question is whether or not acting in self-defense is justified. To start, for the most part, in the United States, self-defense is legal. There are a few conditions, mostly along the lines of the self-defense must be both necessary and proportional to prevent imminent physical harm. There are many ethical tensions surrounding the issue of self-defense. I'll highlight three. First is the question of whether one has the duty to retreat when defending themselves or private property. In the United States, in most jurisdictions, there is no legal duty to retreat. Second is the question of whether or not it's appropriate for one to arm oneself for the purpose of self-defense. The legality of this tension is questionable in the United States, as the Second Amendment does not mention self-defense as a purpose for bearing arms, but the late U.S. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia would beg to differ. And third is the question of whether it's ever appropriate to use deadly force in self-defense. This is really a culmination of the previous two issues. First and foremost, of course, we must consider ahimsa, the vow of nonviolence. The ethical tensions surrounding self-defense look a little bit different for lay Janes and for mendicants. Of course, mendicants have taken a vow of total nonviolence, so they must not retaliate in any way to any attack, up to and including giving their life in order to not retaliate. Now, for everybody else, violence ought to be a last resort, but if it's necessary, then it may be justified. So with this, we can conclude that perhaps one does have the duty to retreat in order to minimize violence. Though technically non-canonical, there are Jain texts which divide himsa, or violence, into four different types, one of which is virodhi himsa, which is effectively self-defense. The idea is that if more violence would come from not acting in self-defense, one is absolutely justified in acting in self-defense. This includes defense of country, society, family, life, property, and religious institutes, of course, when necessary. When it comes to the issue of whether or not it's appropriate to arm oneself, we can consider that Jain lay people do serve in the military, and as we saw in class, nuns have even been trained in self-defense. I think the three most important aspects to bear in mind when considering this issue are ahimsa, proportionality, and necessity. For example, we can consider some non-lethal items that a person may carry, where legal, for self-defense, such as pepper spray or brass knuckles. These, arguably, are pretty appropriate for the purpose of simple self-defense. The issue is much more complicated in the instance of firearms, as these are absolutely deadly weapons, but are legal in many parts of the United States to have for the purpose of self-defense. And third, I think we could all agree that if you wanted to have a tank in your driveway to defend your home, this would be not proportional and not necessary, and possibly quite harmful for the purpose of self-defense. Now, when it comes to the use of deadly force, of course, this is not the ideal situation for any person, but if it came down to it, lay Janes may kill in self-defense. Again, we just have to consider the least violent route possible, but if you are faced with somebody who's about to kill you, this is an appropriate and necessary defense. We can think about the weapons mentioned in the previous slide and whether or not those are appropriate and when the use of deadly force is appropriate. No matter which way you spin it though, all violence is violence. So, with the issue of self-defense, one ought to act in the least violent way possible. Now, this least violent way may be just to retreat, but only if necessary, one may respond to an attack with self-defense in a proportional way in order to minimize the total violence done. Thank you for watching. I hope I was able to shed some light on the issue of self-defense from a possible Jain perspective.